for gentle birds that sing. Oh, oh, praise him, all ye people, praise the King. Praise him for the peaceful porch and rocking chairs that sway, and praise him for the rolling hills where children laugh and play. Oh, and praise him for the wandering souls that never lost their way. Oh, oh, praise him, all ye people, praise the King. Praise the King, praise the
morning. This morning we are privileged to have Graham Atkinson as our speaker. Graham is married. His wife, Melissa, she's here with Graham. They have one daughter, one son. Graham joined the Sheriff's Department under Sheriff Bill Hall in 1985, long time back. In 1990, he initiated a Gifts for Children at Christmas ministry that last year helped 800 families. The DARE, Drug and Alcohol Resistance Enforcement Program, which reached every fourth grader in the Surrey County schools from 1990 till 2005, featured Graham as the graduation speaker. He became our sheriff in November of 2006 and served until 2014. In 2014 is when he received 70% of the vote. It's quite a bit. And then effective April this past year, 2017, he became our state, North Carolina State Parole Commissioner serving in Raleigh. So we are privileged to have Graham with us, and I welcome him up here this morning.
So it's the last night of revival. Been going on for weeks. The message has gotten out over the community. The crowds have gotten bigger each night. During that last night, the preacher looks back at the very back pew, and there's a young man who's sitting back there who looks out of place. He looks awkward and confused and like this is not really some place that he's comfortable being. The message goes on. The preacher kind of builds into the invitation at the end. And just before he closes out, he says, if anybody has a need, come up front. I would love to pray with you. And he noticed the young man get up, and he starts to kind of awkwardly come down the aisle, tell us something that he's never done before. He walks over to the preacher, and the preacher says, son, what can we do for you? And he said, I need you to pray for my hearing. So the preacher lays his hands on the young man's head, and he prays a very poetic, very eloquent prayer. When he finishes the prayer, he leans up and he says, can you hear me? And the young man looks a little confused, and he says, yes. He said, well, turn around and face the congregation. He said, son, I want you to tell the congregation what you asked me to pray for. And kind of embarrassed and humbly, the young man said, I asked you to pray for my hearing. And he said, and are things better with your hearing now? And he says, I don't know. My court date's on Thursday. This is a true story. Melissa and I hadn't been married long. Samantha was about 3 years old when we got married, so she was maybe 4 years old. We visited a church that we didn't usually attend regularly. We attended a church regularly at that point. We visited this church because they had a new preacher. And he was a little different, we'd heard. And when we got there, the table was set for communion, which Samantha had been part of before, but it was a little different than the way she had ever done it before. And when the preacher got ready to start the service, he came out and he was wearing a robe. Now, I don't mean like a choir robe, or he was wearing a robe that looked like a monk's robe. Had the hood on the back and the rope for a belt and all that sort of thing. And he did communion differently than the way that we had been used to doing it. So at supper that night, the three of us were sitting there, and Samantha looked up and she said, what was that we did at church today? Well, like I said, I came into the game late with this, so I was a new father, and I wanted to be wise like my father was. And I wanted to appear that I knew what was going on. I wanted to do a good job with my daughter. So I said, well, you know, sweetheart, how we just had a blessing before we started supper. And she said, uh-huh. I said, well, what we did at church today was a way of thanking God for all the other things that he does for us, without thinking that what she had seen was the guy in the monk robe, middle-aged fellow with a salt and pepper beard. And I was really proud of myself that I'd come up with that explanation off the top of my head. and her little eyes bugged out real big, and she slapped the table with both hands and came up off her seat and said, "That was God?" I said, "No, honey, you know how Santa has elves? That was one of God's elves that was there today." If we're going to be effective as Christians and we're going to behave the way we should and we're going to understand the world that we live in today, the point behind those two stories is we've got to have perspective and we've got to have some understanding, because without those we're going to be lost. We live in a kind of a troubled world. The things that go on around us a lot of times are things that we don't understand, even more so just in the last couple of weeks. You know, for a long time now we've lived under the threat of terrorism. We live under the threat of political dissension. We live under racial conflict and social divide. Here in the last couple of weeks and even now today while we're talking, there are people that are in the midst of a whole different kind of storm in Florida, and the people in Texas that have just come through that. There's drugs and there's crime and there's just plain old obnoxious behavior. We live in kind of a challenging time, and a time like no other that at least any of us have ever seen in our lifetime, and maybe that have never been experienced in this country. And when I was sheriff, I would regularly meet with people, and even now in my new job, I meet with families of victims, families of offenders, people that have been affected by others' behaviors or situations. And a lot of times, how many times over the years have I had these conversations with people? You know, why are we targets of other people? Why are we targets of terrorism? Why can people not find a way to set aside differences and treat each other fairly? And you get the more personal meetings, and the thousands of those that I've had. Why won't my kid quit using drugs? Why does my mama have to drink so much? It's really embarrassing. I love her, but I'm ashamed of her. Why does my grandson steal from me? And why won't they quit doing that? Why does my sister stay in that abusive relationship? Why can't she get away from that? Why won't she quit it? Why does my daddy sneak into my bedroom in the middle of the night? Why won't anybody make it better? And when you sit across from people and you try to answer those questions, and what folks would like to have is a canned answer and a logical response and a solution. They want it to stop. They want it to go away. They want it to be fixed. They want somebody to make it better. And we ask ourselves those questions. Why do we have to deal with those things? Why do we have to have crises in our life? Why do other people have to do things that affect us in a negative way when they could just as easily not do it? Well, I think that the Apostle Paul gave us the answer to that in his letter to the church of Ephesus. If you'll look in Ephesians, if you'd like to look, if not, I'm going to read the 6th chapter of Ephesians, verse 12. Paul is writing to the church, and this is what he says. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Too often we blame other people for things that go wrong, or we blame groups of people. We want to blame somebody. We want to say it's your fault and we're going to punish you or we're going to fix you. When the truth is, usually we're not fighting other people per se. They are the manifestation of evil in the world. But Paul hits the nail on the head. It's not other people that create problems. When he's talking about evil forces and principalities, he's talking about the devil. He's talking about Satan. And if we're going to believe that there's a God in the world, we've got to believe that Satan is also very real. And he's at work every day. The bad things that happen may not be because people are acting of their own accord or their own free will. They are, but there's a power that's influencing that choice. And the only way to resist that power is through the love and grace of Jesus Christ. Now, when we read what he says here, and we think about the world that we live in today's terms, and we consider ourselves to be so advanced and so intellectual and so far beyond the times that this book was written, you think, do those words really apply now? If you'll read through that, what you'll find out that the argument Paul is making here is really about whether or not anybody except the Jews were eligible for the love and grace of Jesus Christ. There was a conflict going on at the time that he wrote that the Jews wanted to stay in control of everything that was going on in the world, and everybody else was to be pushed aside. And Paul said, no, the Lord loves everybody, and we all have an opportunity to come to that. Now, you talk about a political and a cultural and a social conflict. We don't have problems compared to what Paul was dealing with there. That started back with Abraham and continues on still today, and is the root of a lot of the problems that we have going on in the world, is that conflict about who is God and who's and to who all is his love and grace available to. So as we as Christians prepare ourselves to meet the challenges of today, we got to know who our enemy is. We got to know who it is that is moving against us. We've got to know the root cause of a lot of the problems that we deal with. And it may not make it any easier to deal with them, but it makes it much easier for us to know where to get the help that we need to deal with them, if we'll be honest about what the true cause is. Satan is going to come after us. He's going to come after us every day. If we're Christians, he's going to come get us. Think about this. Don't think that he won't come after you because you're a Christian. Think about it like this. He's going to spend all his time coming after Christians. You know why? He's already got everybody else. Why would he spend time on those that he's already collected? His entire goal is to destroy Christ's church. And the way that he does that is by capturing one soul at a time. And when we take a stand as Christians, we become an enemy of Satan. He is going to use every trick, every deception, every tactic, every temptation to work on us as individuals, because we all have our own individual weaknesses. We all have things that we're tempted by. We all have things that we're inclined to want to do. We all have things that are harder to say no to. And he's going to move against us because he knows those things too. And as Christians, if we're going to stand against that, we have to understand. We've got to have the perspective and the understanding that it takes to be able to face the challenges that we're going to meet, whether they're in our personal lives, if it's sickness, if it's finances, if it's problems with relationships, or it's things that you can't control that you see going on. Prejudice, social conflict, racial arguments. We've all been brought up, and we've been influenced by other people, by choices, by decisions, by things that we've heard people say, by actions that we've seen them take. But it's the way that we respond to those things, the way that Jesus would respond to those things. Because that's what we're supposed to do as Christians, right? As Christians, we're supposed to be disciples. Our goal is to emulate the life of Jesus Christ. We know we're going to fail. We know we're not going to get it right because we're not him. But our goal is to move in that direction. So the question we have to ask ourselves when we're responding to these things, are we responding to these things as Christ would, or are we responding to these things in our natural human flesh, or are we being influenced by an evil force that would have us behave some way other than what Jesus would do? Now, I know somebody's sitting out here making this argument in your own mind that, well, you know, Jesus saw the money changers in the temple, and he went out and he turned the tables over and he got the whips out and he ran them out. You know the difference? He's God and we aren't. He's perfect and we aren't. He was directed by the Lord in a very particular set of circumstances for a very specific reason to do what he did there. Every other time during the course of his entire ministry, I challenge you to find a place that contradicts this. Every other time, he responded with love. He responded with compassion. He responded by saying, this is it. This is what I'm offering you. You come get all of it you want, you're welcome to it. But if you don't, I'm not going to drag you kicking and screaming. I'm not going to get in your face and argue with you. I'm not going to challenge you and tell you that I'm going to be your enemy if you say no. He offered it to us. He laid it out very simply and very easily. We make it much more complicated than it is. And he said, if you want it, come get it. As I have worked through a lot of these things that I have had happen in professional life and personal life and some of those things that I was telling you about there, a lot of times the decisions that I've had to make have been spur of the moment. They've been come without warning. Sometimes they're life and death decisions. Sometimes they're things that you don't have time to stop and research. And you don't have time to stop and kneel and pray and ask for an answer. So thank goodness a foundation was laid for me early in my life that has allowed me to be able to, when the time came to reach up and pull out things in a great big hurry, to help you make a good decision. In the midst of the storm that's going on in Florida, the midst of the storm that's going on in my life or your life or this church or this community or this state or this country or whatever it is, one of the most comforting things that I have learned to flash through my mind in those times is the 46th Psalm. And part of it says, be still and know that I'm God. It doesn't say run, get your gun, and rush out and take over the situation. It doesn't say gather together a group of people and protest. It doesn't say tell everybody that thinks something different than you that they're wrong. It says be still and know that I'm God. That's one of the hardest things in the world for us to do, isn't it? It's to be still. We want to do something, especially men. We want to do something. We're ready to mount the charge. We're going to go burn and slash and cut and confront and beat down and whatever we got to do. If it's something that's threatening our family, something that's threatening somebody we love, especially if it's something that we know we can't control, that makes us that much more determined we got to do something. But the Lord says, be still and know that I am God. Over time, I think as we mature and we have more experiences, we can learn from things that happen to us and we can apply those to other circumstances. And the best lessons that I have ever been taught in my life was not somebody talking to me. It wasn't somebody showing me something in the book. It was a lesson that I learned as an example, something that I saw. And I was able to take the principles that I learned from those things and apply them to other situations in my life. When I was, Mickey had mentioned I started at the sheriff's office in 1985, so I was 8 years old when I started. Actually, I was 21 the day I started. I was still pretty young. Back in those days, you didn't have to have any formal school to start. You had to have it within the first year. But basically what happened was I plowed tobacco till 12 o'clock that day that I was going to work at the sheriff's office. While everybody else was eating lunch, I ran up to the courthouse. They swore me in. They gave me a badge. They gave me a gun. They gave me a car. I came back home, took a nap, and went to work on third shift that night. That was my training. So I was 21 years old. I had the power of arrest. I had a gun, I had a car, I was out by myself, didn't have anybody with me. The first night I worked, everybody else was on the firing range, so from 11 o'clock until 2 that morning, I was the only deputy in the county. So I was pretty confident. I got this. You know, I'm the law. I'm 21 years old. Got a brand new shiny gun, got a badge. Nobody else out here to tell me what to do, so it's all mine. So I went through the school, and in May of that next year, so it was May of 1986, I hadn't been working a year yet, one Sunday afternoon, we went to work on second shift at 3 o'clock. We met like we always did at the beginning of the shift because the most important decision we had to make was who's going to supper at what time, because we don't want to mess up everybody's meal breaks. While we were doing that, we got a call to go out off of Red Brush Road, way back off the road back there. There was a fight going on. We got there. One guy's got a knife. One guy's got a stick. Not really an unusual call. Took very few minutes to clear that up. Got that all cleared up. Was all very satisfied with myself. You know why? I was the law. I got this. So on the way back from that call, there was another deputy that had gone out there with me. And he was older than I was, and he was one of those guys that you kind of looked up to because he always kind of knew what to do if you didn't know what to do, and you didn't have to ask anybody else. On our way back, we got behind a couple of guys on horses who were obviously drunk, and they were all out over the road. We had CB radios in our car because we could say things on the CB that we can't say on the county radio. So we had a conversation about these two people on the horse. Well, it was the other guy's turn to go eat supper. So I said, you go ahead, take care of supper. I'll take care of these guys on the horse, and then I'm going to go eat. He said, are you sure? You'll be all right. I said, yeah, I'll be all right. I'll be fine. You know why? I was the law. Side note that I forgot to mention in the earlier service, it was getting hot, so that was the day that I decided not to wear my vest because it was just too hot to wear that stinking vest under a uniform. So I get out. My intention is to tell these people to get out of the road. They start to get mouthy. I can't put up with that because I'm the law. So I arrest one guy on the horse, and while I'm doing that, I take a gun away from him, which again was not a very unusual situation. It happens. Everything was going along good, and I had it well in hand because by then I was almost 22 years old and had almost a year of experience. As I'm starting to the car with him, some of the family members have seen what is going on, and they start to collect in the yard, and this guy pulls up in a pickup, and he walks over to me, and he's drunk. So I know I got to deal with that when I get done with this guy. And he's being pretty belligerent and says, you know, what do you think you're doing? And I say something like, I'm taking this man to jail. And as I start to push by him, he reaches in his waistband, he pulls out a gun, and he sticks it right in my face and says, oh, no, you're not. I'll kill you before you take him to jail. Now, sometime later, somebody asked me, what kind of gun was that? And I said, I don't know. It looked like a piece of stovepipe when you stick it up there. To me, it looked like it was about that big. I literally, because of the way the sun was shining, could see the bullet in the barrel. So if you go back now and pull out a copy of that report, and it's a much longer story than I'm making it, the report is going to say something like, subject number 2 arrived on the scene after a confrontation, removed a gun from his waistband, pointed it at me. He was subsequently subdued and arrested and was charged with the following crimes. In my mind, when that was happening, what it would say is, ah! Gun! You know. So we got all that done, and it's a long story that I'm not going to take up time to tell how that happened. But when he pulled that gun out, I pulled my gun out, and at the time I was carrying a .45 pistol, which you call cocked and locked. In other words, it takes about 4 pounds of pressure to make that gun go off. I was standing there looking at him, pulling the trigger, and somewhere, not an audible voice, it wasn't a booming voice out of the sky, but the Lord said, don't shoot this man, it's going to be okay. And I'm thinking, how is it going to be okay? He's still got this gun pointed at me, and I don't have any cover. But I didn't shoot him, and it was okay, and we got everything cleared up. I went home that night, I went to bed, didn't really think a lot else about that. It's kind of one of those, everything's calmed down, we're good now. The next morning, my daddy got me up because he never in his mind reconciled that just because I was working second shift from 3 to 12 or 1 or 2, I shouldn't be able to get up and work in tobacco at 5 till time to go to work at 3. So he got me up that morning, we rode around, we talked, and he kind of looked over at me. This is part of the story that gets hard for me to tell. He looked at me and said, had a pretty tough night last night, didn't you? I said, yes, sir, I guess I did. If any of you are involved or thinking about being involved in emergency services of any kind, do not buy anybody that loves you a scanner, because they will sit there and listen to it, and you forget that, because I hadn't mentioned a thing to him about what had happened. There was no point in it. But he said, well, your mom and I were listening to the scanner yesterday, and we heard you get out with that first group, and they said you'd taken a gun away from the guy. And I said, yeah. He said, then they said some other people had pulled up, and what I didn't know was we were in somebody's front yard, and they had seen me start to have a little problem. Well, they thought I needed help, so they called the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office is talking to everybody else on the radio, and everybody in Scannerland is getting the play-by-play of this whole conversation or the whole event that's taking place. And my daddy said, well, they said he had a gun pointed at you and that you were in a standoff. He said, I knew that I was too far away to be of any help to you. So I got down on my knees in the living room and I said, Lord, please don't let anybody get hurt. And I'm going to tell you the truth, I was a little offended by that. What do you mean don't let anybody get hurt? I'm your son. I'm doing my job. This guy's drunk. He's got a gun pointed at my face, and you're worried about anybody getting hurt? What about me? I always have been firmly convinced in my mind, and there's no way you'll ever know the timing of that Daddy's prayer resulted in the message of, don't shoot that man. And I didn't. There's a lesson to be learned from that too. One of my favorite things that happened was a drug raid years ago. And I know I've been told we get out at 12, so I'm going to speed this story up. I'm not going to keep you past that. We were working a case on this guy that was a meth head back before being a meth head was the common thing. And he was way off the hook. He was an habitual felon, somebody we had dealt with forever and ever and ever. He got into the meth thing, and the more meth he took, the crazier he got, and he just kept progressing down this path, and he was selling a lot of meth. And we finally worked in to get an undercover officer in to buy meth from him. And our goal was to buy enough meth from him over a period of time that we could send him to prison forever and not ever have to worry about him again. So we probably pushed things a little further with it than we should have. And I wasn't the sheriff then. I was a narcotics lieutenant, so I looked at things a little bit differently than you do when you're the one that's actually responsible for all that goes on. So I had my unit, and we were working this case, and we were doing what I thought was a really great job of this. And the guy suddenly decided he wasn't dealing anywhere but at his house. Well, his house is down off Siloam Road, and the house is a stretch. But in order to get to the place where he was living, you've got to go out a very long, very, very rough, I wouldn't call it a farm road because that would insult somebody's farm. The road is terribly bad getting in there. It's almost a mile long. When you get out to the end, there is a great big wide open, 12, 14, 15 acres of grass, and a trailer such as it was sitting right in the middle of it. In other words, there's no good way to get there. There's no good way to get close to it. He's going to hear you coming. When you turn off Siloam Road, you can't do it. It's impossible. Even if you had a helicopter, he's going to hear you coming. So the last deal we did with him, I was listening on the wire, and he, as I said, he was just getting progressively more crazy. In the middle of the deal, he said, wait a minute. He stepped outside, and we started hearing gunshots, rifle shots. Bam, 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 bam. Found out later in the middle of the deal, he stopped the undercover officer. He picked up an AK-47. He went out and he sprayed the wood line with bullets. And he came back in and he said, I know they're watching me, and I know they're coming after me, and I'm not going back to prison. He said, I've already decided. If I let them arrest me, nobody will ever know who I am. But if I can go out in a blaze of glory, if I can kill 4 or 5 of them, they're going to write movies, and write books and make movies about me. So I decided right then, okay, this is as far as we're going. We're going to take this guy off. Now how are we going to do it? Because he's not leaving the house anymore. We got to go into his house under the circumstances I just described. There's no way to get in there, and we got to take this guy off. So we put our plan together, and we got everything in place. We got ready to go, and there was a guy named David Cox. Some of you all may have known him. David was a Baptist minister, and he was our chaplain at the time. And before we got into to do these search warrants and that kind of stuff, David would always come to the briefing, and then he would always pray with us before we left. So we got ready for the briefing. I kind of pulled David off to the side, and I said, listen, these are the circumstances that you're going to hear. This is a bad one. You know, sometimes these things are routine, and sometimes you get this feeling in the pit of your stomach like, I hope everybody comes back from this one, because I'm responsible for it. So I told David what the circumstances were, and, you know, like we all do, I said, I need a really good prayer on this one. A good prayer. Like we were just talking about, you know, I need you to pray hard, because if you don't, the Lord's not going to take you serious, right? He's not going to understand the significance of it if I don't pray really hard and make it a really good prayer. So I told David what was going on, and we got ready. We got circled up, and he started praying, and it was a very nice prayer that he was praying. And he was kind of getting into it because his adrenaline was kind of pumping too, because his role was that he was supposed to ask for a prayer that was going to provide this shield of protection around us. And I'll never forget him saying these words. He said, Lord, this man that they're going after, blind his eyes and deafen his ears. And I was standing there in a circle holding hands with these other guys, and I opened my eyes and looked at him. I thought, blind his eyes and deafen his ears? David, really? Can we not have a, you know, that sounds pretty Old Testament. Blind his eyes and deafen his ears as he comes down off of the mountain. But so I kind of shook that off and went on, and we got in the car, and or the van, and we took off to where we had to go, and all the way down that road, you know, I'm praying, Lord, please just let us be okay, and don't let us have to hurt anybody. Wonder where that prayer came from. Don't let us have to hurt anybody. Well, I rolled out of the back, and I was the second person there. We had a guy with a ram who was the front, and a guy with a shield who's supposed to protect the team. I was the third guy back because the guy with the ram gets out of the way, and the guy behind me, and our job was, if you got to, kill him. The guy with the shield's role is to protect the team. Our next two were, if you got to shoot him, shoot him. So guy with the ram hits the door flies open, we step in the door. Now keep in mind, this was sometime 2000, 2001. We step through the door, and as we start in, there's our suspect. There's our guy, the one that wants to kill us all. There's the one that we're there prepared to kill, with his back to the door, with a set of 1970s stereo headphones on his ears, and he's dancing to the music. Well, just a couple of seconds after we make entry into that door, his face is down in the carpet. The pistol's been removed from his back pocket. He's in a set of handcuffs. AK-47's fully loaded, sitting right there by the door when we go in. Well, you know, we're all human when we do that. You get that adrenaline dump, you get all jacked up, and so my role as the leader there is to say, all right, house is secure, everybody take your vest off, go outside and get a breath, we're going to get our search organized. Let's get together and get it done. I walked in the back bedroom there, and as I'm standing there looking at the bedroom, I thought, blind his eyes and deafen his ears. His back's to the door. And when's the last time anybody ever saw a set of those headphones that worked? The ones with the cable that's still plugged into the stereo, that he's standing there. There was a lesson that I learned from that too. What I learned from the guy with the hearing was people find themselves in the same situation, but they come from different perspectives. He knew he needed help. He just wasn't sure where he needed help from, and the preacher had an opportunity there to listen to his real need and respond to that, and not what the preacher thought he needed. As Christians, we have a responsibility to do that too. It's our responsibility to meet the sincere, real needs that people have, as well as the perceived needs that we have for them. The story about my daughter taught me this. She was a little tiny girl. She knew that there was a God, but she didn't know God. She wasn't old enough yet. But she was very excited to learn a little more about Him. And I was so busy trying to appear wise, trying to appear fatherly, trying to be a scholar, that I missed an opportunity to talk to her about Him. We as Christians have those opportunities that come up, and we got to decide who it's about when they do. The lesson that I learned from the story with my daddy is, it ain't all about me. You know, the Lord loved that man that I had a gun pointed at as much as he loved me. And that's a little tough to swallow, especially when I felt like I was 100% right and I felt like he was 100% wrong. But you know what? The Lord loves us all. He didn't want me to die. He didn't want him to die. You know how I know that? We're both still alive today. I see him once in a while. And after that, he quit drinking, turned into a really good father and a really good husband. And his family that had had kind of a shaky life before that, it wasn't terrible, but it was kind of shaky because of his drinking, he didn't do that anymore. His brother, on the other hand, has never forgiven me. He was the first guy. But that's okay too. He's still alive, so he may do something one day. The story that I learned from David Cox and the situation I just described with the meth guy is this. What the Lord really wants us to do is not to fix everything ourselves and not to decide exactly how to do it. He wants us to admit that we're afraid. He wants us to admit that we have weaknesses. He wants us to admit that we have insecurities. And he wants us to say, I know all this. Help me. And then he'll fill in the details after that. So many times in my life has the Lord laid a plan out for me, and I think that is a great plan, except there's a little detail that needs to be tweaked just a little bit. Obviously, he was busy and didn't see what I see there, so let me fix that. When I do, it throws the whole plan off. There are going to be many things in our lives that we will not be able to control. Personal, professional, community-wise. And there are times that we get angry, and there are times that we get mad, and there are times that we get frustrated. And when we do, and we think the world is out of control, and the hurricane's coming, and how will we ever get over this, and who's going to survive it, and who's not, and is the Lord really here, and is the Lord really in the midst of all this? Let me read you the last part of Psalm 46. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the heathen, and I will be exalted in the earth. When it's all said and done, and everybody's done choosing up sides and doing what they're going to do and liking and not liking and hating, and when it's all said and done, the Lord's going to win. So when you find yourself in those things where you don't know what to do, remember that. Be still and know that he is God. And thank goodness he is.